Thank you. Am I good? Okay. So yeah, I just want to say thank you for having me. It was actually in Sarnia that I met Brenda and her whole family and Mark. And Eric got married to my best friend Amanda, and it was there that I also fell in love with sailing as well. So since that day and the wedding, I've learned to sail dinghy boats, so I completely understand the router issue. So anyways, I'm going to get right into my presentation, and I am going to share my screen with you guys. So just allow me a few minutes here to make sure that I've got this right. Can you guys see the presentation slide? I just need someone to tell me because I can't see you necessarily. So if someone can just say yes.
Yes.
Okay, yes. Thank you. I appreciate that. So Feminine Harbor and the Light Stories is a structuring women's narratives. It's a social profit that I started in the Waterloo region about 6 years ago. 7 years ago, maybe. We've had 2 years off the pandemic. But I will share with you the research that went into it and why I decided to do it and how I think it's relevant to all spaces. And then I'm happy to take questions at the end. So I've had that name, Feminine Harbor, in Portuguese, which is my first language, my mother language, since I was 19, Porto Feminino. But when I read Carl Sagan, Pale Blue Dot, a vision of the human future in space, it really stuck with me that there was a collective intelligence at play where we are starting to see ourselves differently as the more technology develops and the more we have an understanding of who we are and our place in space and our technology. So I just want to read this out loud to you because when I read this quote, it really solidified to me that the idea of Feminine Harbor was something that, we can work with together if we have that understanding. So the Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There's nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit, yes. Settle, not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. So he's looking at the Earth from far away. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the playable blue dot, the only home we've ever known. And when I read that, I thought, of all that I know of Indigenous mythology, and I thought, what if there's a way to bring all of our knowledge together, right? And again, please keep in mind, this book is from 1994. This is really new knowledge, right? So it's very recent that we have this kind of perspective, especially in the Western culture. So when I was doing my master's on education, I was actually studying female leadership. This is my dog in the background, by the way. She's right here, just in case you hear someone growling a little bit. It's Gina. In my master's of education, I was studying female leadership. And I wanted to understand, because I was a teacher at the time, I wanted to understand what kinds of supports were in place for women to become leaders in education, because there are more female leaders in the field of education than there are in any other industry in Canada. So while we have about 35 to 40% rate of female leaders in the education industry, that number drops significantly in other industries. And so, for example, it's at a less than 10% rate in the private sector. And, people kept diminishing it and telling me, oh, it's just education. And I was like, well, I get it that we have a bigger sample, but why do women feel compelled to become leaders in education, right? And so what I started noticing is that there were a couple of things at play. One was a care ethics. So Dr. Nell Noddings is the name that I have, gravitated towards on and on again around care ethics. And I highly recommend people reading her books. She has a very clear understanding about what care is and how to show care. And that is very prevalent in education. The other work that has really influenced my work was the work around vulnerability and shame, I should say, as well, around Dr. Brené Brown's research. She has a clear understanding how we need to communicate openly and vulnerably in order to be able to foster authentic relationships. Then the work of narrative inquiry. Joseph Campbell is a big name for me, but there are many more and scholars that actually influenced my research at the time. But basically understanding how our personal stories have a fundamental influence in how we shape things around us, and our personal stories, they have that we can become the heroes of our own stories or not. And that hero-like quality is really what leads us to taking on roles of responsibility and leadership, is being brave enough to want to embrace those challenges. And then a trauma-informed lens by Dr. Gaber Mate. He's one of my favorite names around trauma-informed lens, and just how, adverse childhood experiences shape us. So when I started looking at all of that, and that all fit with the research around female leadership, I thought there's no reason why I can't really dissect this and create something for the community where women can see their themselves as leaders beyond the industries that they are working in. There's more to that, because every industry is about people. So if we shift that lens and we make it about people, then maybe more leaders will come through in different industries, but they need to see themselves that way. Another big piece for my social profit was intersectionality. So the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, gender, and they apply to any given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination and disadvantage. So how could I bring intersectionality into my work? And it started with myself, just understanding my own intersectionalities, being a Brazilian woman with Indigenous heritage in Brazil, and being someone who has, become an immigrant here to Canada. There are so many threads to my own story that until I understood and made peace with them, and when I did, I was able to then bring people from different circles that are my circles personally to interact in these nights at the Light Stories. And I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. So in terms of thinking intersectionally, I really thought it was very important to think about cross-generational relationships and cross-cultural relationships. When you take a young woman in her 20s and you ask her a question, for example, about love, that answer, because of her time, the fact that she carries only 20 odd years in her body, will vary distinctively from someone who's in their 70s. And the answer for what love is from a person in the 20s and another person in her 70s will be vastly different. So we see time outside of us, but we need to start seeing it as we carry time within ourselves, and how that changes, and being accepting of people living different times, even if we are in the same time at the same place, right? And also cross-cultural is our relationship to space. We also carry our lands within us and the systems which we were brought up in. I may be sharing the same room as someone like, say, Brenda, who I know well, and she's connected to my best friend, but acknowledging that we've had vastly different experiences in our upbringing, and that land and that space in which we grew up with has shaped us differently. There's different rules that we were exposed to, different things that we were allowed to do, different experiences with nature, exposure. And so when you start seeing the land within yourself, but also the time within yourself, then you can really be intersectional about how you bring people together. So our logo, I wanted to highlight, is a flower, because the flower is the sexual organ of nature. It is how nature reproduces itself, is through flowers. But we've had that conversation. This was an Indigenous woman, an Inuit woman, who created this logo. And it was about creating also a safety circle around the babies and around the children. So if you notice carefully, you can look at our logo and you can see 4 different individuals with 4 different children inside of that circle, because she drew from her experience with muskox circles in the Arctic, and how muskox keep the calves in the middle and protect them, right? And how we wanted that to be the harbor and harboring life that way. And it's also mixed in color, because, you know, the world's getting mixed and mixed by the minute. So again, like Eric, who's Brenda and Mark's son, married my friend Amanda, who is Brazilian. So these mixed children, they will need all of us to step up for them. You know, there's no more one circle fits all. We all need to amplify our sense of safety and circles around all of our children, and understand that their intersectionalities and their mixed backgrounds belong to all of us. So that was the logo. And also there's a lot more to it. There's the time reference with the time, that if you look at it, you can see the a time glass, and she was very mindful when she designed that in its conception. And the other piece I wanted to refer to, the reason why we call the light stories. Light is something that we don't fully understand necessarily. So all of our natural world is coded by light. So this is a photo, an image by Craig Burrows, and he was one of the few first photographers to photograph flowers in the wild with a UV camera. And as it turns out, this is how bees see flowers, not how humans see flowers, because we don't have that capacity, but this is how bees see flowers. And every natural being in out there is coded with light, and they're able to use that reference in finding out who has the nectar, which flower has nectar and which one doesn't. So it's really about what kind of light they are able to see with their UV capacity. So we wanted to bring all of that natural world knowledge and respect into an analogy and a structure that reflected it. So light, because I am an educator and I'm a primary educator nonetheless, I taught, primarily JK to grade 2, even though I have a K-8 school now. It's an acronym because teachers love acronyms. And light means love, integrity, guidance, humanity, and trust. And so we've decided that it's not okay. When I created this, there's a lot of talk about let's search for the light, and okay, but what does that really mean in human language, in human behavior, right? And an understanding that the creator is love, and that we need some guidance in terms of what kinds of behaviors we're looking for. And so a sense of integrity and wholeness. The guidance piece, which is, our intellectual pursuit cannot be hoarded. We need to share. We need to guide and mentor one another in our discoveries. Our sense of humanity is honoring our bodies, and all of the, humanness that comes with us, and trust, that sense of, faith and an understanding that not everything is up to us. Now, the interesting piece is that I actually worked really hard, and I can anybody who's curious, I can send you this further. I worked really hard to align this with the medicine wheel. And there are other ancient paradigms that actually align. They differ between each other because they were from different geographical locations. So, you have the Cutrún in South Chile for the Mapuches, which is also a wheel. And as you can see, I'll just go back. Our logo is a wheel as well. Like it has 4 directions as well on purpose. Again, she was an Inuit woman who created this. She kept that in mind. And so our light stories, they align with those ancient paradigms, but in a more modern language, so that we can continue to maintain the systems and the technology that we've developed, but you can also humanize them. And so each event in the light stories, we hold 4 events a year. Each event has one of these words as a theme, and we share stories. So 4 women of 4 different generations and 4 different cultural backgrounds share a story of what it means to have integrity. And then on the other event, they will work with guidance as their theme, and the 4 women will share what it means to guide or to be guided by a woman who was important in their lives. The event on humanity is, what it means to be a woman in a woman's body. So you will get, for example, stories about as beautiful as stories about transformative births as you will get some stories about what it meant to have a stillbirth and lose a child, right? And those stories are fundamentally important if we want to remain human, and we exclude them from our structures. And at Feminine Harbor, we center on them. We want to understand them, and we want them to guide what kind of leadership we want to see in the world. And love is the one that permeates them all. We always talk about that. It's not necessarily a love that is the romantic love we've been exposed to constantly. It's a love of self, a love of the other, primarily a deep sense of self-love so that we can truly be loving to one another and self-respect, right? So the threads are storytelling. We hold workshops. So before each event takes place, we have a workshop where we bring all these women who are going to be the storytellers together so that there's a sense of safety and trust between them and that we can develop the common theme. We are sponsored by the KW Art Gallery. And so we do a tour with visual arts, and that enhances it's a really beautiful environment, and the arts just enhances our understanding of each other, right? It elevates us. And there's always live music. So always a musician, a female artist who shows that women can compose, write, and create in their own right. So that's what it looks like. This is it. Now, it may seem simple as, you see a photo of, a few ladies together and the light stories happening, but I want to go over from the left to the right just to show you how complex it is to put these together. And that's why I needed a break over the pandemic. So the first two women here, they're related. The two Black women you see, they're both Brazilian musicians, in fact, friends of Amanda and I. Luanda Jones is a Brazilian Black musician, jazz singer. She was our musician for that night. She speaks Portuguese, obviously. Olivia is a very young woman here in the community who is going to university. She's brilliant. She's a white woman who spoke that night as well. She's in her 20s. Karen Coviello, the woman in the middle, she is the CEO for the Habitat for Humanity in all of Canada. And again, you begin to explore these power dynamics, right? Like a woman like Luanda and Karen probably wouldn't have come together necessarily, but they know me, they know my ethics, they know the research, and so they trust me to bring them together in the same environment. And Karen is a fantastic, wonderful person to work with a lot to teach us about structures, leadership, and power. So that's me right there. The person next to me with the red shirt, that's Laurie Campbell. She's one of the strongest Indigenous leaders in all of Canada as well. She is the department head at University of Regina now. She was recently promoted for the Indigenous department there. And again, a dear friend of mine, and she knows my story and she knows my intersectionalities. She knows I carry Indigenous roots and trusted me to introduce her to women that were safe, that would keep her safe and allow her a sense of respect that way. And the woman here, the far right, is Wafa, and she's a Muslim woman who is an immigrant to Canada. So bringing these women together in that intersectional space with all these different understanding of time and space is really a work of art in itself. And it's quite beautiful to see how their stories then they start seeing the humanity in each other. And the beautiful thing is the outcomes. So there's a change of power dynamic in central narrative. Suddenly all these women add each other on Facebook, or they become contacts with each other, and they start seeing that they have far more in common than they have difference, but they respect the differences and they respect their space. We have new relationships in the community, which our community starts benefiting from. There's a female creative power at play where the women begin to realize, wait a minute, that young woman in her 20s, so Olivia, starts looking up to Karen and saying, wait a minute, I have a lot to learn from the older women in my community. I don't need to simply just deny their existence or try to be more or better. You start creating relationships that were not necessarily going to happen in the current patriarchal systems that, the younger women don't necessarily value the wisdom that comes from with older women. And the structures that are created by women. These women are in leadership positions, and the women looking up to them in that session start thinking, okay, they can do that, and maybe I can too. So that's pretty much what I had for you guys today. I hope I kept it to the 20 minutes. I may have gone over a little bit, and I'm happy to answer questions. And yeah, it's